America, my name is Osei-Frimpong. I come to you live every Thursday about this time. And today I'm going to talk to you about reparations. And people always say, well, how would it work? I don't know. Chapter 13 of Sandy Darity's book, From Here to Equality, actually just lays out a plan. And actually, I think it gives a structure of a reasonable plan. So I'm going to talk about the plan. I'm going to talk about the plan's virtues. I'm going to try to anticipate a few objections, and then I'll leave it for you to share, like, and subscribe as you will. Right? So we're talking about reparations for racial terrorism and slavery, Jim Crow, and racial terrorism broadly. And what does that mean for black people? Because if you don't know, the wealth that was created through racial terrorism, not just extracting labor, but extracting fear and weaponizing, state guns and violence against black people, that is actually very profitable. And so depending on how you run the math, it's anywhere from, $60 trillion to $111 trillion of wealth that was just generated and extracted. If you don't know, America has probably about $90 trillion of private wealth, that's just sitting in people's bank accounts. Right? And that's not government wealth, that's private wealth, right? And the government prints money, so money is only relative to other money in a certain way. So the actual dollar amount doesn't matter. Just know that it's in the trillions. And Darity says, well, okay, so you could figure out how to administer reparations a few different ways. One, you got to figure out who is eligible. Best way to find out who's eligible is figure out who, once you pass the bill, look back 12 years and who identified themselves as African American 12 years ago, and in addition to that, can trace lineage to slavery. So if you identified yourself as African American 12 years prior to the passage of the bill, I would say consistently, not just like on a college admissions essay, but if you consistently identified yourself as African American, like you need to bring two forms of ID, not just your college admission, but also something. And so you need to bring like a passport and a bank statement. So, and that's dated back 12 years. And also have a descendant, draw back a lineage from a descendant of a slave. So if you do that, and a lot of people can do that easily, very easily, then you would be eligible. And what he says is that then that group should elect a board of governors, right? So it would be a nationwide election for people who qualify to participate to elect a board of governors who would then, that group would decide how to institutionally hand out the money. So I'm going to hit the opening and we're going to talk a little bit about the details about how that's going to go down.
To the beach, y'all.
Sound good to me. Never change the ways for the world or the government. If I was the president, then I would state facts. You leave it up to me, I paint the White House black and ain't no future in your front.
To the beach, y'all.
Sound good to me. Never change the ways for the world or the government. If I was the president, then I would state facts. You leave it up to me, I paint the White House black and ain't no future in your front.
So the book I'm talking about is From Here to Equality by Professor William Sandy Darity. Chapter 13 is where he goes through the plan. The first 10 chapters are making the case about what was promised, what was owed, why it was owed, the varieties of terrorism that was heaped upon black people because they were black. And, the wealth that was created in the system is still in the system. Just talk to any white person with an inheritance or like a gift from a nice wedding. And the poverty that was in the system is still in the system. And you don't have to go too far to realize that black people are disproportionately poor everywhere we are. And it was caused by the government, right? So this is America's debt. You can say, I wasn't alive during slavery, so I shouldn't have to pay. No, you're an American. And America was the institution that legitimized and the second law passed. And the second Congress passed the Fugitive Slave Act. So like the nation didn't know, the nation was 5 minutes old before it decided that like, all right, so most importantly, the government's responsibility is to make sure slaves get back to where they're supposed to get to. So the wealth that was in the system is still in the system. The poverty that was in the system is still in the system. And America needs to make it whole because America hasn't gone anywhere. You can say like, well, I wasn't alive, so I shouldn't have to pay. That doesn't make sense. Like, that's not how institutions work. All right, that's like saying, well, I wasn't alive to to vote on the Constitution, so I shouldn't have to abide by its rules. Like no, institutions don't die like people do. And so this is the debt Americans owe to a subset of Americans, and this is the debt America should pay to a subset of Americans, period. And if you want to immigrate to America, then you have to take on America's debt. So even if you just got off the boat, some of your taxes should go to this reparations because you want to be an American. And this is America's debt. So, and if you don't want to take on America's debt, you don't think you should have to take on America's debt, then you should stay home. Go back to where you came from. So the goal is to make Black Americans whole. So Black Americans who have identified for 12 years as Black prior to the signing of the bill would then vote for a board of governors who would then decide how to institutionally invest that money, because the idea is that we're investing the money in making Black communities whole. So some of it would be institutional investments, some of it would be some of it would be cash checks, but cash checks without the same institutional infrastructure will just end up being siphoned. So a lot of it will be institutional investments, like, seeding Black power companies and Black cable companies and Black car makers. And so like a lot of the institutional investment would be getting Black people into the productive economy of America. So you'd say like, well, that would just be inflationary. No, we would just actually be making Black people productive. Because Black people are underproducing because we don't have capital in a capitalist society. If you don't have capital in a capitalist society, you can't really participate in society. What you can be is exploited by other people. So we're being exploited by other people. All right. So that board of governors would decide. The board of governors elected by Black people would decide how to make institutional investments. And if you are wondering, well, what does it count? What if the board of governors would also have a discrimination process where we, like, if you think that if there's a question about your Blackness, you could file a petition and it would be sent up the bureaucracy, and they would come down with a determination about whether, like, the box you checked 12 years ago and your lineage, like, would allow you to participate in the program. Right? That would, there are always marginal cases, yet we still have governance, and there could be an appeal process, but pretty much like it would be handled by us. It would be handled by us. It would be an all-Black election for a Black board that deals with the money required to make Black people whole. Right, and this is, like I said, this is what Darity proposes in Chapter 13 of From Here to Equality, and it makes a lot of sense to me. As a program, it actually makes a lot of sense. And people are like, well, that's Black nationalism. No, it's actually it's the Black institution that gets Black Americans into being full Americans. And there's another book by Gary Peller who's on racial consciousness, on how Black nationalism isn't the same as white nationalism. White nationalism's like about colonial control and exploitation. Black nationalism is self-defense. That's why, that's why, Black schools aren't segregated necessarily. They're only segregated if they're run from people outside of the community. If they're run at the behest of people outside of the community. If they're run for the sake of people who aren't Black. And right now, a lot of white people buy whole Black institutions, and those Black institutions are run for the sake of white comfort. Right? So we want some sort of Black institutions to be run without a disproportionate concern for white comfort. And until they're independently funded or funded by like this trust of black money, then they're going to be sucking up to Mackenzie Bezos for her largesse, because every now and then Mackenzie Bezos gives a few $1 million to some black institution that she likes. And so now all these black institutions like now conform and comport themselves in a way that makes Mackenzie Bezos feel nice, right? And that might not be consistent with securing justice for black people. Mackenzie Scott. But if I call her Mackenzie Scott, you don't know where the money comes from. If I call her Mackenzie Bezos, you know, oh, that's Jeff Bezos money. Right. So yeah, Mackenzie Scott throws around a few $1 million of her throwaway money to some black institutions. And now all black institutions are kind of styling themselves as the kind of institution Mackenzie Scott would want to spend. And that's not appropriate. So instead of kissing Mackenzie Scott's butt, you should have to actually make your case to this board of people elected by black Americans. Right. So that would be, and then that would take care of the administration. And it would be administration in terms of an investment. There would be cash checks, but more importantly, there would be institutional investitures. So that when black people use their cash checks, it would actually be in a productive manner to support, self-determination. Right? Because if you have cash checks, but then like all that goes to loans by banks that aren't black and healthcare by device providers that aren't black and power companies that aren't black, then like, no, what we want is for that, $111 trillion to actually go into the institutional investiture to create black power companies black power companies, black cable companies, black microphone manufacturers, all that stuff. We were locked out we were segregated from so many different jobs for so long that like we've just been locked out. We've been locked out of the generational knowledge that goes into running a lot of companies. Right? So the idea is that this board, elected by black people, would administer the, and it would be a completely public process about like how they come up with the priorities about what institutions to fund and where and why. And it would administer the $111 trillion. That's the top, and that's the highest figure. There it goes all the way down to, I think the lowest figure was around 40 or maybe 80. But at that point, it doesn't matter. What matters is that there's going to be like an accountability procedure, administered by black people who are elected by other black people and are accountable to black people. You could FOIA any of the meeting requests, all of that stuff. It would be an American institution for to redress, harms done to black Americans, and they would decide what to do with the money. Petitions, whatever. And so that sounds like a fair mechanism for redress. And once again, you would decide it by when Congress passes the bill that initiates this board, who identified as black 12 years prior to that. And I would say on 3 different forms, not just one. 3 different forms you identified as black 12 years prior to the passing of the bill. You get to participate in the first election of that board, who would then decide the structure. And, a 200-person board. And then it would decide the structure of how to make black people whole. Right? And so I think that's an appropriate mechanism. I think he lays it out. If you want more, once again, chapter 13 of From Here to Equality. He did the job. Thank you for your time, and I will talk to you next week.